Welcome to the ReSaulved podcast, where we dissect all of the themes, legal and otherwise, from the TV show Better Call Saul.
All right, welcome to the show, Cheryl Wilson Griffin. It's been a long time of me pushing and trying to bribe you to get on.
Cajoling, I think maybe would be another word that might be accurate. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to finally have you here. I think you're pretty infamous in our space, but I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and kind of say hi to the audience for people who may not know you.
I mean, if you don't know me, you'll know me soon enough. Cheryl Wilson Griffin. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I like it. Okay, cool. Well, then let's dive right in. So the episode we're going to be talking about today is season 2, episode 7. It's called Inflatable. It is, I probably say this at the start of every podcast episode, but it's one of my favorite episodes. Right in the middle, we'll definitely talk about the scene where Jimmy gets his big, bright idea. It's classic. I absolutely love it. But this was the first time you were watching the show. And yeah. If I'm not mistaken, you're fully caught up now from season 1 to this particular episode.
Not totally caught up. So I started through season 1, but I have not. So I had to jump ahead a bit. So I have a little gap. But yeah, actually, I don't know why I wasn't watching it to begin with. I don't know. I never watched Breaking Bad, so I just assumed. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think you might be the first guest on the show that hadn't watched Breaking Bad, but then was going to watch this one. I think more people have seen Breaking Bad or seen some episodes of Breaking Bad, but hadn't seen Better Call Saul. I don't know. For a sequel that's really a prequel, I think it is one of the best written TV shows by far of the last couple of decades, for sure. Like, well, I know people... Go ahead.
Bob Odenkirk is like one of my favorites. Like, if you haven't seen that movie, Nobody, go check it out. It's freaking amazing. I hate movies because I don't have that long of an attention span, and that movie is amazing. I've seen it like a bunch of times.
Yeah, it's on my list, and it's reminding me now that I need to check it out because I'm a big fan of Bob Odenkirk as well. Okay, so in this episode, I chose you specifically for this episode because there are so many different instances of the theme of really going your own way, right? And really choosing for yourself what makes sense for your life and the struggles, right? Because at the same time, as a couple of the characters are making these really big choices about taking control, there are other characters who are, to their chagrin, relinquishing control in order to get what they want, right? So I chose you for a few specific reasons, but so we get to learn a little bit about Jimmy in this episode. We get to watch Kim going through the decision process of whether or not she's going to stay at HHM or maybe move somewhere else. So the opening flashback scene, I wanted to know what were your takes on that scene? It opens with a young boy. We learn very quickly that it's Jimmy in his father's store.
Yeah, I don't know. So it's funny. I didn't really know what to do with that, and I kept going like. So he ends up, at the end of the scene. So the guy Griff's his dad. His dad is obviously a kind-hearted guy. And at the end of the scene, the bad guy or the grifter says to him, like, there's wolves or sheep. You have to decide which one you are. And so I kind of saw that as foreshadowing and kind of said, like, okay, what does Jimmy end up being, right? What does he choose? But I'm not sure that, like, that's answered in the episode, right? I'm not sure. Wolf sounds like you eat people, right? That you destroy things. And I don't think that's necessarily what Jimmy becomes, right? Like,
yeah, I love that you brought that up because I think for me, when I first saw the scene, I was like, oh, Jimmy wasn't stealing from his dad. His dad was giving things away to people, right? But Jimmy also does steal, right? The guy pays for the 2 cartons of cigarettes, and Jimmy takes the money. He gives him his change, takes the money. Cigarettes are out the door. So his dad is now out the money for those 2 cartons of cigarettes, right? I don't know if I would call him a wolf, because I agree with you. Wolf feels like more aggressive than what
Right.
his character is. But what I've taken away from that scene, now that I've watched it a few more times, is that I think what Jimmy takes away from that interaction is, I'm not going to be the one who's taken advantage of. I'm going to
Exactly.
be the one that's paying attention to everything that's going on and using people's own human nature against them.
Right. To my benefit or to my leverage. Exactly. Which is really, if you think about it, what law is. Right? I
Yeah.
mean, some of my favorite cases that I've worked on, some of the favorite trials I've watched, is the best thing that's happened is the lawyer has turned the thing against the other lawyer, right? Like that very piece of evidence that they've most loved and most thought was the most important thing. And man, and you're just like, ooh, like, that burns.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And being able to, read between the lines, right? I mean, Jimmy could clearly, and I think the scene too, you kind of get the sense that this isn't the first time it's happened. This has been
Right. Yep.
happening a lot. And this is actually the last straw for Jimmy, where he's kind of lost respect for his father.
Right.
Right. And I think that's part of why he steals the money and he's so angry when he like slams the cashier drawer. But I think it also kind of mirrors a little bit of what he does in the rest of this episode, right? Where he wants to leave Davis and Maine. He realizes that if he leaves, if he just quits, he's not going to get his sign-on bonus. And so he proceeds to go on a tear of just totally obnoxious things in the office in order to get himself relieved, right? Without being fired for cause. So it's like, in a roundabout way, it's his version of what the grifter was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe, but think of it. Here's another thing, right? So the inflatable thing, right? The thing on the side of the road.
Yeah, I love
it's
it.
at every used car shop. So I had kind of an interesting, like I wrote down two things, right? So he's like the inflatable that kind of gives him the inspiration to how am I going to get out of this, Davis and Maine and Davis, whichever it is. How am I going to get out of this firm without having to pay back my bonus? On one hand, it's like the guy, the inflatable, is wearing like all the flashy clothes that he's now given up to kind of work into this mainstream law firm, right? But I thought of it in another way, because if you look at those things, right, they're blowing in the wind, they're reacting, mm-hmm. They're actually not reacting at all. They're just going with the flow. They're not taking any empowered steps about their life, right? And so on one hand, after he sees that, he goes home and he gets out all of his crazy suits and his bonkers ass colors. But on the other hand, it's like I think that's where he kind of decides, like, this is it. I'm going my own way. I'm not going to be blowing in the wind anymore, right? I want to be me. I want to be me, Jimmy, doing it the way I want to do it. And so, even though he's being kind of dastardly maybe about how he's going about getting out of his contract, maybe he could have just asked. I don't know. They probably wouldn't have been nice about it now. I think in the end, it's like it's all for like a good reason, right? Like he's decided he wants to go his own way, and he's got to get there some way or another. And I think, when you look at, for instance, a lot of the startups in the world, right? Everybody's snowballing one thing into another thing, right? And so he just needed the snowball to start his own practice. He needed that money to, in theory, start the practice that he wanted to start with Kim.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he couldn't walk away from it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting too, because like in that scene when he's looking at they have a name, and I never remember.
I have no idea what they are. They always make me think of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, because they say that's how Dee dances. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because the look on his face when he initially is sat there at the light and looking at it is despair. Right. At least I think, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like the inflatable is, like you said, right? It's blowing in the wind. It's stuck there. It can't really move anywhere except for these like jerky motions wherever the wind takes him. And then by the end, he's like, oh, okay, got it. Right? Like, this is how I'm going to do it. And that's also what I really like about it. And you're right. It's absolutely about him coming into his own. And I think that's also why when he's talking with his boss, when he's like leaving Davis and Maine, you can see that he's not thrilled with himself that this is what he had to do in order to do it, right? But he says it, right?
Right, yeah.
Right, exactly. He feels a little bad, but he says it himself. He's a square peg. Like and he says something similar to Kim when he goes to visit her at HHM, where he's like, you know, he starts to go into his spiel of like, I'm going to cross all the T's and I'm going to do it by the book. And then very quickly, he's like, no, like, I don't want to do this if I can't just be me, right? Like, I'm colorful. Like, yes.
Well, he likes to clearly practice towards the edge, right? I mean, and that's definitely a place.
Yeah, yeah, it's one place to practice from.
It
right?
is one place to practice, and it's certainly a thing, right? Like, there's definitely lawyers that practice there successfully.
Right. Yeah, totally. And you know, the episode before this one, I think so much is focused on Kim, right? And this episode, I think, it shares the spotlight between the two of them, but you also get to see a lot more of what Mike is going through, which you don't really see in some of the episodes leading up to this one. And I think that juxtaposition is really interesting, right? So like Kim and Jimmy are choosing to go their own way because that's how they're going to get what they want, right? And Mike, on the flip side, is choosing to make deals with a criminal that he 100% does not want to make deals with in order to help his daughter-in-law, right? And you can see just how like upset Mike is about that and how defeated he almost feels. That it's like it's what's the term, like it seems to kind of go without saying to him.
Yeah, I mean, boy, I have a thing I want to say, but I'm legally prohibited from saying it. So I'm trying to find a reaction that's a response to into something that I'm actually allowed to say. What I would say is the following. You know, sometimes people do things that they wish they hadn't done for one reason or another. And the important thing is to think about the repercussions before you make the choice, because after, there's no time to make it. So
That's true.
So I think, you know, Mike is going to find it hard to live with himself. And I suspect, I don't know what's going to happen. The rest of the viewers might. I don't know. I don't feel like it's going to go well for him. I feel like it's negative in the future for Mike.
Well, I won't give you any spoilers. I can tell you that Mike's character is in Breaking Bad. That's all I'll tell you.
Oh, so okay, so he lives long enough for that. Okay, well,
yeah,
we'll
he's a beloved character.
I'm gonna have to stick with it. All right.
Yeah. You know, but it's you know, the thing that I love about Mike too is, you know, he's rough around the edges. He keeps everything real close. I wouldn't call him secretive so much as tight-lipped. You know, like everything is on a need-to-know basis, and you never know what's going on in his head. But he, at the same time, he also displays such resolve and leadership and like reason, right? He's constantly trying to get the people around him to simply be reasonable, right? Right. And the one person that he, in the episode prior to this one, he's like doing the same thing with his daughter-in-law, who just like refuses to believe that there isn't gunfire in her neighborhood, right? Like, even though there 100% is, which is why in this episode, he's helping her get a new house. And it's almost like he's just given up. Like he's like, okay, we're just going to get you this house and we're not going to spare any expense because unfortunately I already know that there's this criminal and this drug dealing enterprise that I can get the money, right? I can crack a few skulls. I can get the money. What is it you need?
Oh, Mike. So many choices.
Well, what did you think about particularly that scene with Mike and Jimmy where he's recanting his statement about who owns the gun?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking a little bit about earlier last year when I was trying to train some non-legal people about conflict of interest. And I was like, well, one, that's not how you do conflict of interest. You don't tell them after. You have to tell them before that they had you hogtied in the desert with a gun to your head. You have to tell them beforehand that, what's his name? Salamanca? How do you say it?
Salamanca, yeah.
Salamanca.
Yeah, Tuco.
So that was about the first thing I thought. I was like, no, that's not how you do conflict of interest clearing. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it was Mike was clearly very perturbed when the concept that he might have been paid off was raised, even though, that is what it is. I mean, but he also didn't want to be seen as fearful, right? He didn't like that either, right? Like he didn't want to be seen as like he's doing it because he's scared.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I think he always has that air about him of, I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm not doing this because I'm scared. I'm doing this because it's the thing that has to be done, or it's the thing that makes the most sense, or it's the next right action. It doesn't seem like want has a lot to do with his choices.
Yeah, and I think the next right action thing, right? I think a lot of people live their lives that way. I've been known to follow that methodology from time to time. Not necessarily the most successful, right? Because it's not a strategic action plan, right? It's like you get to the fork in the road and you pick from those two things, but you're never going to get to the fork that you want if you're just always waiting till you find out what the fork is, as opposed to trying to get to the fork that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, it's a very reactive place to be. Well, and so I love that you actually watched seasons 1 and season 2 leading up to this, because I'm also really curious. So another thing happening in this episode is Kim meeting with the partners at Schweikart, which is the new law firm that is courting her, faster to partner, and some other bonuses will be coming if she decides to make this move. And there was that, I mean, I would love to get your take on that interview, the meeting, and kind of everything that happened there.
I don't know. I hated everything about that. I was like, run, girl, run. Like, don't walk. Like, all of it. Like, how did she not know that guy's name, that it was Rich and not whatever she called him, Greg or whatever?
She called him Howard.
Howard,
yeah.
That's what it was. I was like, nope, something's wrong. Like, how did he not say his name? No. And then they started asking her all those questions about her personal life and how she got there. And it's like, started turning a weird therapy session. And I'm like, no, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah. I found that it was like, so there are these little moments where you get to kind of see inside Kim's head a little bit, because some of her body language and stuff gives away how she's feeling. And I think that this is one of the rare times where you see her, I don't want to say like nervous, but like uncomfortable in a way where it's different than some of the other discomfort you see her being, right? We've seen her be thrown in, like in the dungeon doing doc review. We've seen her be nervous about different things that Jimmy does, but there always seems to be a calm there. Whereas I think in this scene, when she's meeting with them, there's a different level of uncomfort. Did you also pick up on that, or were you
Yeah,
going
no,
in a different
absolutely. I
direction?
wanted to give her a hug, especially, but I think it gave me a little insights as well. They were talking a little bit about, how she ended up from the small town in Kansas or whatever, to Albuquerque. And she said, well, I wanted something else. I didn't want to work at the Hinky Dinky or whatever the name of the grocery store was. And I think it's in that moment when they say, well, what did you want to, what did you want, right? What was that other thing? And she said, well, I guess I just wanted more. And I actually think it's at that point where you start to see her character realize, actually, I don't want this. Actually, it's not this that I want, right? Like, I'm like, it's good that they asked that question, because she would have just been still campaigning for the job. And that's where the flicker of doubt shows up in our head. Like, do I want this? If asked this question, would this be what I'm describing as what I want? Maybe not, right? So
Yeah.
even though it was super awkward, I think it actually in the end turned to her advantage. And then, later, when Jimmy comes by and he's got the cards made up already, which, where you're going to get die cut cards that quick? God bless. I don't think that's possible. I mean, you can get them fast, but that was just like an hour or two. I don't know.
He made him himself. He's got practice.
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, they're nice, all black and die cut. I don't know about all that. I call malarkey. But she's like, they don't have the same view of the way they want to practice law, right? And so she kind of gets to the point where she's asking, can I trust you with my career, basically, because he's a little more colorful, right? But in the end, he's like, look, you can do it. Like, you're a great lawyer, blah, blah, blah. And he kind of gives her this pep talk that is kind of the second step in her making this decision, right? I think that question is the first step, and his kind of accidental pep talk is the second step. And it got me thinking about one of the things that we talk about or David Cowan talks about a lot, the core four, right? Like, she got some good insight from her core four. And on the other hand, Jimmy really doesn't have anybody like that, right? He started dictating his resignation letter to Omar. And thank God Omar knew what was in his contract, but he didn't really have anybody to bounce ideas off of or thoughts off of, right? So that's one of the things I think that's a really good takeaway is, like, make sure you have those people around you that you can get that career stuff and say, am I crazy? Have I lost my mind, right?
Yeah. And, it's a really interesting point that you just brought up, because I immediately related that to the wolf comment in the beginning.
Interesting.
That Jimmy Saul, he's always going his own way. He's always doing his own thing. He was the black sheep of his family. He went to an online law school, right? Like, he doesn't fit in with the suits and the partners and the law firms, right? All of that. So I think it's really interesting that you bring up that point, that he is kind of all alone. He's got like a couple of buddies, and he has people that work for him that are on his payroll, but Kim is the only person in his life that means anything to him, outside of his brother and all of that other trauma, right? Yeah, it's really interesting. The wolf thing comes back around.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, right?
Yeah. Well, and okay, so we talked about the opening scene in his store. We talked about the scene with, I think it's the DA, who's just blown away by Jimmy. She's just constantly like, who is this guy and how is he even still practicing law, right? And I think too, so specifically in your career, right? Because you've made a couple of big leaps and you've made some changes, and within the law firm, right, world, what how do I want to phrase this? Like, what part felt the most realistic to you of what Kim was going through, and what part felt the most unrealistic,
Yeah,
if at all?
I think there was, I think the conversation that Jimmy and Kim have, in the conference room where, he's saying like, look, we're going to be our own boss. We're betting on ourselves, all the positive stuff, right? It'll be our own practice. Like we don't answer to anybody else. And it's like all the good stuff, right? But then she's like, well, like I, just got Mesa Verde client. There's no way I'm going to be able to take him with me. And he's like, well, you can do that again. She's like, you make it sound easy, right? So it's that idea that you have to be able to bet on yourself and maybe not look before you leap. So there needs to be a plan, right? You don't leap with no plan, but the plan doesn't actually have to be a new role or exactly all sketched out. It can just be, here's the general broad strokes, or here's what I'm going to look for, or here's what I'm going to wait for. I mean, I think we've seen that happening on LinkedIn like crazy lately, right? I think even today we saw Chad Abood announced he's, starting his own consulting thing, and he did the same thing. He quit his job as, I think he was an in-house counsel, just said, I have no new plan. I just done with this, and I'm going to come up with a new plan in 2023. And I think if anything, that's one of the things that COVID gave us. It gave people the strength to realize like there's other options. You don't have to work for or with people whose values don't align with yours. There's no reason for us to, work in jobs that we hate or with people we don't like or doing things we don't agree with. There's really no reason in 2023 to do that. And I hate to say that like you can love your job, but you can't. There's no reason you can. And if you don't, then move on. I've told people that, I remember in one of my old law firms, like that I really loved working for, there was someone who was always complaining, always complaining. And I was like, leave.
Right, you don't have to stay.
Just go anywhere else. Like, you're super, you're good at your job, great. Go anywhere else if you think it's better. Like, go dig holes, go be a sanitation worker. Like, there's a million things you can do, and that's even when I, left my role working with you at Loophole. My husband and I talked about it, and we're like, we can both work at Target if it comes to that, right? like there's backup plans. All you got to do is like eat and pay your rent, basically, or your mortgage, right? Like,
yeah. It's interesting. It's so funny you say that because a former client of mine works at a boutique law firm here in New York City. Her and her partner, she used to always say they would talk about that, and whenever they would feel overwhelmed or just like wanting to throw in the towel, one of them would yell fruit cart at the other one, because they were like, we could just get a fruit cart and sell pineapples on the side of the road. We can move to Jamaica right now. Like, I don't care. Like, we can figure out a way to make money. How much money is a different story, but we can figure out a way.
Right. We might have to adjust like how we're living, the Plateau may be off the table, but we're going to have to go to Corbell and get that $9.99 life, but like, it'll be fine. But I think that's just, having confidence in yourself, and also, again, having some game plans in the background.
Yeah, which I think a couple of things. One, I think too that when Kim does accidentally call Rich Howard, I think that is the nail in the coffin of like, this is too much like the situation she's currently in.
Yep.
But also, I think there is that stark difference between what Kim and Jimmy are currently going through, where there's agency there, and what Mike is going through that feels like there is no agency, right? He's kind of not bowing to, but he's being pushed in different directions by his daughter-in-law, by Tuco and Hector Salamanca, right? And all of the different things that have happened in his life, past and present, right? And the difference in how that plays out, right? Where Mike throughout this entire episode is sullen and angry and frustrated. Whereas Kim and Jimmy might feel those same things, but there's excitement and there's like a passion and a fire behind it because they know it's almost like the road is wide open for the two of them, and Mike knows exactly where his road is leading.
Exactly right. I mean, I think I play fantasy football, and my favorite day of the fantasy football season is like 5 minutes after we finish drafting, because I'm always convinced I have the number one team. No games have been played, right? It's like, it's the most optimistic you can possibly be. You know what I mean? No one's hurt yet. No games have been played. Everything's looking up in the world, right? And so I think that's exactly what they're experiencing, is like, nothing bad has happened. We're feeling good about our decision. Open road. Where do we go from here? We can make any decision we want, you know?
Right. Yeah. Whereas Mike, I feel like, is starting to feel. I think that Mike recognizes just how deep he is into the quicksand. I think in this episode, where he's like, okay, there's some laces that can't be untied here. Like, I have to deal with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the problem when you start making these kind of limiting decisions, right? Like, where you're kind of tying yourself into, okay, well, that decision's passed and now I'm on this road. And
right.
There's really no way to go back on it, right? Like,
right.
there's no going back on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he has no one to blame but himself, because this is his idea.
100%. Right. Yeah.
Right. As a way to help Nacho, which I think is and I'm pretty sure that episode is coming up. I have the guests set up. We're going to be recording it in a couple of weeks, but that episode is also really fantastic, where Mike is like, okay, this is your problem, but is that really the solution? Because that problem is going to beget right. And so it's also really interesting to watch it play out, that in Mike's attempt to help someone else, he's now gotten himself even deeper with a gang of really erratic, violent people. Right? Exactly the type of people he doesn't want to work with. He likes working with people that are calm and reasonable, even if they are criminals.
Right, exactly. I'm sure there's calm and reasonable criminals. I haven't met them, but I'm sure they're out there. I don't want to meet them either, just in case anybody's suggesting I might.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think of Gus as calm and reasonable as far as like criminal kingpins go. I think there's a lot of things that he does, especially in these kind of earlier seasons, where you're like, oh, like he has thought of all of the things. Like, this is not his first, second, or even 100th rodeo, right? And so I love seeing all those different things like play out in the episode. So I'm conscious of time, though. So as we start to kind of wrap up, what was your favorite moment, scene from this particular episode?
Oof, that's a good question. Yeah, I think when I didn't realize, I assumed that Kim was going to take the job, when she got the offer. So when she was in the parking garage and ripped the cart apart, and I was like, oh shit, is she going to go solo? Wait, can I say? Okay, well,
yeah, you're fine. That's okay.
Like, that's when I realized, and I was like, oh yeah, like, do it, girl, like. So I think that was a really great, like, kind of pivot point for me in the episode. I really got excited about that and intrigued to see where it goes next.
Yeah, I think Kim is just such a, I don't know if lovable is the right word, but I think she's one of the characters that people really, really root for in this show, because she's one of the only.
You want to cheer for her. You want her to do well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also had that same feeling of like, yeah, get it. I think my favorite scene is when Jimmy is admitting to the office in Davison, Maine, that he's the one that hasn't been flushing number 2 to conserve water. And he's like, oh, and the managing partner is like, they're low, they're
Low flow toilets, yeah.
They're low flow toilets. Like, what are you talking about? And then as he's kind of his last like walk through the office, he takes the can of soda from the junior associate and throws it in the garbage on.
What was the significance of that? I was like, does he not like her, or is he just being crazy? Like,
I think it was him just kind of being, I think it's a little bit that shit runs downhill.
right.
And she was the only one in the office that he could really display his beef for. He found her incredibly annoying. And I think she really represented for him all of the reasons why this office didn't work for him. It's funny, that was the episode that Sheila and I were talking about. And even Sheila mentions when we were discussing it that like, that is not how a junior associate would treat someone coming in with his stature. They would just do it for him, as opposed to highlighting and flagging everything he did wrong. And I think that, that's really what it is, right? He sees her character as being there to be like, I did that wrong, constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that she was like so concerned with the environment, with giving him a hard time about the recycling and whatever. And so for him to use that reasoning, and with the juicer, right? Like, it's like, oh, I'm trying to be healthy. And so it's just kind of like a big F you to her specifically.
I love it. And what's really fun? The not flushing thing is hilarious, because I actually have experienced that at a major US law firm, where like there had to be a thing. It was a whole thing. It was a very nice bathroom, and it became an HR issue. And I still don't know who it was, like, but the HR took care of it somehow. But I burst out in laughter at that point, because I'm like, that's a real thing that happens in law firms apparently, because now it's the second time I've heard of it. So,
right? I mean, it's a very passive aggressive way to be very disruptive to the workflow of an organization, right? Like, I mean, that's disrupting individuals who then take time out of their day to complain about it if it's gotten that bad, and then HR and management have to talk about it. Like, it's very, very disruptive.
I wonder if they train you about that, like when you're going through, like, as you're going through your HR chops. So they like, at some point you're going to have to deal with weird bathroom situations. Like, I don't know how you cover that. I was like, God bless you guys, but thank God you're taking care of it. Like,
yeah.
Blessings.
Yeah, seriously. I bet they do. There must be like a TikTok account that's like crazy and random things that HR employees have had to deal with.
Right.
And
I'm gonna have to apply myself to finding this later, because I bet that's hilarious.
Yeah, I bet it's fantastic. I bet there's a whole category of people who've just brought inappropriate animals to the office.
A goat. I don't know why. I feel like it's for sure.
Yeah.
This is my support goat, my emotional support.
That's right, my emotional support goat. Just like the emotional support peacock that tried to get on that plane like a couple of years ago. Like, what are you doing? You can't do that. So thank you for being a guest on ReSaulved. I'm super stoked to have you on, and you're welcome back anytime. And yeah, I'm thrilled that it sounds like I've made you made a new fan for the show. I really feel like Bob Odenkirk should know that I'm on a one-woman mission to just turn people into fans of Better Call Saul.
I think we should let him know. But I appreciate you having me on, and I'm sure we'll see another one once I get caught up to modern times.
Sounds good. Thanks, Cheryl.
Check out the episode now on YouTube and pretty much anywhere you find your podcasts.